supposed to do this on Monday, but I was traveling this past weekend and I just didn't have the time to get this ready up for Monday night. So good for all of you. We got 62 people on tonight, taking your Saturday night out to get on this call. So thank you again. So the purpose of this call, I pretty much wanted to design this because the presentation I gave last month on Index Fund Investing 101, the predominant amount of questions I got were on 529 and UTMA accounts. It sounds like there's a lot of parents within this group. And as this group keeps growing, I think we're at 25,000 now, which is amazing. That's only going to continue. These questions are going to get asked and the demand's there. So I wanted to do a quick little demo on the basics of 529 and UTMA accounts. It's not going to be everything involved with them, but it's going to give you all enough to kind of understand both and maybe start thinking about what's the best account to use for your children. So with that being said, I always like to do a little quick introduction of myself, just so you, as new members keep joining, you can know who I am as a presenter. And when you see my name through the Discord, you can kind of put a face to the name and know what I'm kind of about. So I'm a self-taught investor. I'm 28. I started investing about a year after I graduated college. I was about 23. My very first investment was a $57 contribution into my 401k. And then I've just been essentially investing and reading about investing ever since. This has just been it's a big passion for me. I'm also a husband, father. I have one son. We're going to talk a little bit about his account and what we did with his, because we've got experience with both 529s and a UTMA. We also have one daughter that's on the way. I also wrote an ebook, Index Fund Investing 101. It's a 100-page ebook that dives all into index fund investing, how to build your own accounts, portfolios, how to manage it over time, and then pretty much recommended or other kind of resources that'll help you become a better index fund investor. And you can also find me on Instagram and Twitter. That's how I kind of met Chris Johnson, who started this whole thing. I go by TheWealthDad on social media. And also like to show our portfolio, because I always like to show people that we have skin in the game in regards to what I'm teaching and what we're practicing. So we actually this past weekend passed $300,000 invested. So that was a nice little 6-figure milestone for us. On the left, you can see this is pretty much a screenshot from Personal Capital. It tracks all of your financials. You can link all your bank accounts, your 401ks, your IRAs, even like your mortgages and credit cards, and it'll shoot out your net worth. But what you're seeing on the left is our investment portfolio. When we signed up in 2017, it was kind of around 20,000, I think. And then over these past 4 years, we've just been very fortunate with the steady stream of increasing income, consistent contributing every couple weeks, and a bull market that's pretty much been on a rage for the past 12 years. And we're fortunate, like I said, to have hit 300,000 this past weekend. You can actually even see on this chart right here, this was the COVID dip for us. You may have not seen it at first. There is a little small blip, but we just kind of held tight and kept contributing, and now it's pretty much steamrolled. I think it was like $150,000 increase since that COVID dip. So it kind of shows the importance of buying and holding for the long term. If I project this out like 10 years from now, you probably won't even see this blip on the radar. So it's kind of cool. On the right are all of our funds that we invest in by dollar amount and how they've been doing. Up top, you see our total return against the S&P 500. That's our index right here. We've outpaced it a little bit. And that the only pretty much reason is because we recently invested into VGT, which is an information technology ETF. And that's kind of given us that little leg up this past year. So not even real, I would say expertise. We just kind of got very fortunate getting in at the right time. And also here's our other skin in the game. So why I'm presenting to 529 and UTMA accounts is because we have a son who we are investing for, specifically in a UTMA account. So if you follow me on social media, you'll see his kind of account updates every month to see how his account is doing. And it's invested in 100% stocks. We invested pretty much the exact same way that me and my wife invest our money. And it's very simple. It's 70% the US total stock market index fund, and 30% total international index fund. Remind me at the end, I won't go into too much detail now, but we actually started him with a 529 account and did a complete switch to a UTMA and pretty much liquidated the 529 and put all the funds in the UTMA when he was about 6 months old. So like I said, someone asked me a question about that at the end. I'll glad to tell you exactly why we did that change. And what's the plan tonight? This is going to be a shorter presentation for me. It's not going to be as in-depth as the other one because I want to get kind of more questions. A lot of my presentation tonight is going to be demoing and also answering common questions that I got from the last one as well. So I expect this demo to be this presentation to be about 15 more minutes, and then I'll open it up to you guys and you can ask me any questions that you want. So first is the 529 account. This is kind of the most popular account and what's almost syndicated a lot through personal finance worlds, especially like if you're a Dave Ramsey follower, you've probably read this in his books and his teachings a lot. So a 529 is an investment account that's predominantly used to save for future education costs. So this is what parents are putting their money in for their kids' college education, to try to get that investment money to beat inflation over time, so they're not paying a six-figure tax bill later, so that their kids don't have to pay student loans. And 529 accounts are offered by states themselves, but also by large financial institutions. So you can open a 529 with Vanguard, Schwab, Fidelity, any of these major accounts, but you can also open it with your own state as well. They offer their own plans. Some of the benefits of a 529 is there's a lot of tax benefits to the 529. That's almost the biggest benefit to the 529 because the government's essentially encouraging you to save over time. Hold on, guys, can we mute our phones? I hear some background right now. Let's see if I can mute this, everybody. All right, thank you. So let's go with the first one, state tax deductions. So I'll use my state for an example. It's different for every state. The deductions aren't the same for every single state, but I live in the state of Virginia. If I were to open a 529 with the Virginia 529 program, I can contribute up to $4,000 a year into that 529 and completely write that $4,000 off against my state tax deductions. So it's a nice little write-off of that contribution amount. And then also, just like an IRA in your retirement accounts, that money, when you invest it, is going to grow tax-free. So that's a double kind of tax benefit right there. And then you're going to get tax-free withdrawals later in life. Can you guys not hear anything?
No, we can hear. We can hear just fine.
Okay, cool. Maybe it's just some person's audio on that end. And then tax-free withdrawals later. So this is a triple tax benefit. So this is amazing. As long as you use these expenses for essentially their college education or their future education, all that money that you withdraw from it is going to be tax-free. But they do have to be used for qualified educational expenses. Otherwise, there is going to be some tax penalties. And I'll go into that in this next slide with the commonly asked questions about 529s. But the main thing that you want to take away from this is they are college savings accounts, not even just college, they're higher education savings accounts that you can invest your money in potentially a triple tax beneficial way. So they are great accounts. So commonly asked questions of 529. I wanted to compare what I get asked a lot versus what I find a lot on the commonly asked questions on Vanguard and Schwab from their investors. So here's the 4 questions that I kind of get asked predominantly is, first one is, will I get penalized for withdrawing the money for non-education expenses? So let's say you had like $100,000 and you wanted to pull out, I don't know, $10,000 of your earnings for a car for them. Has nothing to do with education. You are going to owe taxes on that. That's not an educational expense. So you'll owe a 10% penalty tax on the earnings, as well as federal, state, and local taxes can apply on those earnings as well. There's a little bit, once again, differences in this potential state and local tax penalties for that. So I can't give you kind of a cookie cutter what exactly you would pay in penalty. Always go with this, work with a CPA if you're going to be doing something like this, taking out a large amount that isn't for school expenses. But there is going to be penalties if you do withdraw for non-education expenses. And I would say that's predominantly the biggest drawback of a 529 is you have to kind of use them for college expenses. Who can you open an account for? Realistically, you can actually open an account for pretty much anybody. You can open it for yourself if you want to say, if you're like a 25-year-old professional and you're thinking about getting your MBA like in your 30s or something to progress your career, you can open up a 529 for yourself and start putting away money. And you can kind of hit that triple tax benefit where you can write it off. If you choose a state plan, it'll grow tax-free and withdrawals are tax-free. Here's a kind of cool little side note as well. When I opened my 529 for my son, I opened it before he was born, but you need a social security number to open a 529 account. So obviously that was a problem because he's not born. He doesn't have a 529. So what can you do to get around that? You can open the account in your name, use your social security and essentially start contributing. So how we did is we contributed like $4,000 into this 529 under my name. And then when he was born, once I had his social security number, I changed the beneficiaries because you can change the beneficiary to a 529 like an unlimited amount of time. So you can keep changing it, which is another great benefit of it. So we flipped it to his name when he was born. And then he had essentially $4,000 that was growing for him that we were now contributing to. So cool little side note for 529s and how you can get around funding them before your child's born. You can also use your money for kindergarten through 12th grade tuition. So a lot of time, like kids who go to private school who have like high tuitions, you can use your 529s towards that tuition as well. But there is a $10,000 a year per student limit. So that's a little bit more restricted than essentially for college tuitions and things like that. But you can use a 529 for those types of extra schooling before they hit college. And what qualifies as an educational expense? College tuition, trade and vocational school tuitions is becoming an acceptable form for qualified education expenses now. So like plumbing school, electrician school, you can use it for that. Apprentice equipment. So I would think if like you're a plumber and you need to get whatever type of, I don't want to say like plunger, but like all the type of equipment, you can write that off as expenses. Room and board for college, your fees for signing up for like classes or things like that. Books, school supplies, computers, you can all write that off as qualified education expenses, and that'll be completely tax-free from your earnings. So UTMA accounts now, often called custodial accounts. UTMA is just kind of the technical name for it. Custodial is what it's often heard by when you kind of see it across social media or things like that. I think it stands for like the Uniform Transformation of Minors Act or something. Not relevant to this, but that's pretty much what it stands for. And this one is a lot more, you're not going to get as many tax benefits here. So the definition of a UTMA is essentially it's an investment account that's owned by the minor, but it's managed by a custodian, which is normally a parent until that minor reaches adulthood. So for in my instance, my son, who's 1 year old, is the owner of his UTMA account, but I manage it as the custodian. And when he hits 18, I got to recheck what it is in Virginia. But when he hits essentially the age of maturity, that entire account goes to him, but I manage it up until he hits that point. The benefits of a UTMA, there's an unlimited contribution limit, but amounts above $15,000 a year for an individual or $30,000 if you're married will incur a what's called a federal gift tax. Essentially, there's a certain amount of money you can gift to a minor without incurring tax. But without getting too much into the details, you're most likely not ever going to run into this tax situation because there's something called a gift tax inclusion where I think each individual has close to $12 million that they can essentially keep excluding from taxes. It's a lifetime 12 million kind of limit. So unless you make a crazy amount of money and contribute crazy amounts of money, you'll never really kind of hit that tax limit. But speak with your CPA kind of if you get close to that $15,000 a year limit for your kid. I think for our son, we're close to around like $5,000 that we contribute every year to his account. So we're not even close to that limit yet. But where I said the major con for a 529 is you get that penalty. You don't use it for college expenses. There's no penalty. You can use the funds for whatever you want. the child can use the funds for whatever they want. They're not going to incur any type of penalties, because this is essentially just a brokerage account. So once they receive it, this is just like any typical regular brokerage account that any one of us investors has. Myself, I've got a regular brokerage. It's essentially him just inheriting this when he's 18 years old. Another benefit is you can open it for anyone, but anyone can open it and contribute to the child's account. But when you open it, once again, with the 529, you need the social security number. So if you're opening it for like a niece or nephew, you're going to have to at least have that comfortable conversation with their parent to get the social security number to open it on their behalf. But it's a nice little nugget as well. And I didn't listen to benefits for 529 UTMA. You can also set it up to where family members can contribute to their account for you. And it's another nice little benefit. Commonly asked UTMA questions. Does UTMA accounts grow tax deferred like 529s? No, there's no real tax benefits for UTMA accounts, which is kind of I would say the biggest pullback. They are taxed normally at it says the child's lower tax rate, but down below is how are UTMAs taxed? First $1,000 essentially in earnings, annual earnings, are tax free. The next $1,000 child's rate, which is 10%, and then anything above that is taxed at the parent's rate. So your ordinary income tax rate. You're most likely not going to run into any of these major tax implications early on, depending how much you contribute, or if you do contribute a bunch, you might run into these penalties a lot. Maybe I'll break it down a little bit, how much you could expect to owe in this in the demo later, but that's how the tax implications work on an annual basis. Can you change a beneficiary of a UTMA? So where I said 529s, you can kind of keep changing it from one kid to another, like from your son to grandson. You can't do that with the UTMA. You got to be really careful with this. Once you open it in I say child's name, but in anybody's name, the account's irrevocable. It's attached. It's their account, because remember, they're the owner of it. They technically have ownership rights of it. So you can't change the beneficiary. So be very careful with that. And choose when my child receives control of the account. No, another big drawback of that. The child's going to receive control no matter what between the ages of 18 to 25. This is dependent on state because they each have their different kind of rules for this. Most of the time it's 18, but fortunately, like in some instances, I think Virginia, I can even get away with 21, but you can kind of hold it off a couple extra years until you're a little bit more comfortable with that. So true cost of fees. I always bring this up in investing because it's even just as predominant when saving for your children. I'm going to use 529s as an example because I can relate it most to real life kind of examples. So here's an example of two different parents, Amber and Tony. Amber opens a 529 with Vanguard, and Tony opens it with his state plan. Amber, though, takes a more kind of individual approach where she just puts it in an S&P 500 index fund with a very low expense ratio. She manages it herself, and she opens it upon when her child's born, and the fund returns 8% annually. And at the end of 18 years, it's going to grow to a little over 190,000. Tony, on the other hand, with the state plan, picked a kind of an age-based fund that's a little bit more actively managed. So the expense ratio is 0.5 higher. Not crazy amounts, but still a difference over time, over 18 years. And he invests the exact same way upon the child's birth, 8% return. But at the end of his 18 years, he's short almost $10,000 from Amber's account just because of that additional expense ratio for his age-based fund within his state plan. So if we break that down if we put them side by side to see, how did they lose a little bit? Where did you get those numbers? So they both got the same exact return over time, 8% a year. They both invested $400 a month for 18 years. But if you look at the middle column, the expense ratio, all that she was getting charged was the fund's expense, which was 0.04. This plan had additional funds because normally state plans have their own administration fees and things that get tagged on top of the investments themselves. So their real returns were 7.96 for Amber and 7.5 for Tony. The math is simple. You just take what the annual return was and then subtract the expense ratio, and that gets you your actual real return. So if you actually break it down here, Amber only lost $860 in fees over 18 years compared to the S&P 500, but Tony lost a little over $10,000 in those extra fees. When you see the total numbers, they don't look that big a deal. 181,000, 191,000. A lot of kids would be very happy with that money going into college. But let's say your son or your child goes to a private school out of state. That $10,000 miss could be a missed completely tuition payment for a semester, or their books and everything on that they're now going to have to take loans out for or work for. So although it didn't seem like that big of a hit when you saw the total numbers, that $10,000 could be a pretty big cost in terms of college expenses later on. So fees still do matter when you're investing for your kids as well. So be very smart when you're looking at these fees with your state plans against, let's say, if you try to manage it yourself using Vanguard or Fidelity or Schwab. So demos now. I'm going to break out into a couple different demonstrations. So I'm going to go over one last time what the main similarities and differences of a 529 and UTMA is. And then I'm also going to go into Vanguard and my own state plans itself and kind of play around and show you what I look for, what you should look for, and kind of how you can get a better understanding of what plans you should use or funds. Hey, can you guys mute your phone here and one last person? See if I can mute everybody.
Investing.
All right. Okay. Can you guys still see my screen? Cool. All right. So I want you to look at these two columns predominantly. Don't worry about these two. These are different accounts. We're just going to focus on the UTMA and 529 accounts. So thof just kind of give you a little last breakthroughs of what this account does, what this account doesn't do, to give you, once again, another little back of your mind, what accounts might be best for you. So state tax breaks, 529 wins, the UTMA doesn't. You're going to get those state tax benefits if you open a 529 within your state. Federal tax breaks, your money's going to grow tax-free in a 529. It's not going to grow tax-free in a UTMA. It's not going to go completely tax-free in a UTMA account. This is another big one. The impact on financial aid for college. 529 is not going to count against the kid because the account is technically in your name as the parent. So it's not going to, the colleges or federal FAFSA is not going to see that your child has a bunch of money. So it's going to count against your name and it won't count against them. So they'll still be able to apply for student loans if they need it. UTMAs, it's a big impact on financial aid. It's, since the account's owned by the child, you're essentially, if you've got a bunch of money saved for your kid, it's going to be very hard for them to get loans. You'd also argue they're not going to need loans at that time, which is kind of true as well. And you can get grants, but there definitely is an impact for financial aid between the two accounts. They both have high contribution limits. I actually was just reading, I believe different plans have different contribution limits. Some have lower limits. My Virginia one actually has a $500,000 contribution limit that you can put in every year. UTMAs, we kind of talked about that. There's an unlimited, but there's that kind of gift tax after 15 grand a year. Earning potential. Let's see what this one was. Give your money more potential to grow. It's just essentially you can invest your money. So both of them allow you to invest your money into stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, things of that nature. Access to your money. So a 529, you can take the money from for non-education expenses, but you'll pay that penalty tax. But the good news is you can take the money if you were ever to need it. UTMAs, you can't, as the parent, take from that money because, once again, it's owned by the child. So they technically are the owner. You can take money as long as it's used in the benefit of the child. I'm not quite sure what counts as like qualified expenses that's in the benefit of the child. I can do a follow-up on that a little later, maybe in a future demo. But you can't essentially, if you've got an emergency, you need to get a car for you. You can't take money out of that UTMA for yourself. Target enrollment portfolios. These are kind of like target date retirement funds within your 401ks and things of that nature. So they've set up a similar type of concept in 529s, where it essentially changes as your kid grows from 0 to 18. But those options aren't available for UTMA accounts. Total flexibility. There's an X for 529s because, like I said, you've got to use it pretty much for education expenses. Otherwise, you're going to get that tax penalty. But for the UTMA, the big benefit is, once again, it's a brokerage account. The kid can either keep putting money into it when they get older. They can take the money out, use it for a real estate purchase, buying a home, buying a multi-unit property, or investing in some other type of business. And account control. So 529, you have control of the account as the parent when you open it. You get to pretty much elect where that money's going. You can change beneficiaries. You get a lot more autonomous control over that. UTMAs, there's not a lot of control. So after talking about it a lot, UTMAs do sound kind of like the negative option because there's not as many benefits to 529s, but it's really different for everyone's situation, which is why it's so hard for me to give cookie cutter answers to say what you should invest, which plan you should do, because it's really dependent on kind of everyone's situation, their income, their expenses, what their goals are, things like that. So there's another just little breakdown between the differences. So now we're going to go into my state's 529 and what I would look for if I was wanting to essentially go invest in my plan. So the first thing I'm always going to look at is the fees. How do you find that? Generally, in your kind of header columns, you can go to, fortunately, they have one that says invest. Other ones might be investments or things like that, but search for that kind of option where it's talking about the investments of it. Click on it, and they'll actually give you kind of your fees and expenses, the type of investment options they have. So I'll click on fees and expenses, see what they're charging. So they give a little breakdown of all the types of fees that they do charge, asset management fees, administration fees. So these are essentially just extra fees that the state, because they're managing this account, is going to charge you to invest. So that's going to be more than if you were going to manage it yourself. So if you scroll down to portfolio types, you see there's kind of ranges in here, ranging from 0.11 all the way to almost 0.5%. So I'll click on these, and it'll be the breakdown of all of your expense ratios per fund. So that's where I got that kind of example of you can pay higher expense ratios for your state plans than you would if you manage it yourself, let's say in Vanguard or Schwab. So there is an extra little premium there.
I don't know.
Yep. Can you mute your mic? Thank you. You could also argue that although that there is a higher expense ratio, you do get that state tax deduction. So if you write off $4,000 for, in my case instance, I could essentially take all of that extra money and then reinvest into the 529 and kind of recover that way. But like I said, still take a look at those expense ratios. They also offer index portfolios that are smaller, kind of closer to what you would get on the open market if you were just to invest in ETFs on your own. Let me scroll down here real quick. Can't see the screen. So here's Vanguard's plan. This is where if you instead didn't want to go with your state's plan, you wanted to save on fees. Let's see what they can offer me. Maybe they have lower funds that I can invest in and manage myself. So Vanguard, for their instance, offers 20 individual funds that you can invest in. A lot of the funds that are available are ones that you hear on Twitter a lot, social media, like VTSAX, S&P 500 fund. You can invest in those yourself. Their expense ratios are a little higher for some reason in their 529s than they are in the retail market, but still much lower. 0.13 is a lot lower than 0.5 that we saw in Virginia's plan. And those target enrollment portfolios where I was talking about are kind of like target date funds. So you scroll down. This is kind of nice if you want to self-manage your kid's account, but you also don't want to manage it, if that makes sense. You can essentially invest in these age-based plans. It even tells you if your kid's 0 to 1, 1 to 2, and then all the way down to 18. You essentially just select this option. Let's say your child's 2 years old and you open an account. You can use their 20, 36, 37 portfolio, and that's essentially just the year they plan to hit college. And it'll give you a breakdown of what exactly is in that portfolio. So I'll click on portfolio and management, and I'll see the exact funds that make up that target portfolio. Up top here, you'll see it's almost 95% stocks. So it's still very growth oriented, and it's made up of these 4 funds: total stock market funds, low cost. And then as you see, I'll go back here, as your child gets closer to college age, just like a target date fund, it's going to automatically rebalance. So if you can see here, the red is stocks, blue is bonds, pretty much. It's going to slowly over time, as your kid ages, get more essentially into safe investments, your bonds, and your less aggressive investments, your stocks. And as you get closer to that kind of age where they're getting close to going to school, where you can't have short-term fluctuations in the stock market kind of affect that tuition, you'll see once they get to that year, they're pretty much in a 50-50 split between stocks and bonds. So they still have a little bit of the growth that's going to keep growing their account as you're withdrawing it, but they're going to have that safety net of having the bonds to back up that stability in the short term. So it's definitely a nice option if you want to manage your account yourself and just throw that, just use one fund to save on the fees that you might pay in a state plan. You can check the fees here to compare it. So their expense ratio is 0.14. The one that I had on Virginia, 529, let's see, I think was 0.5 target enrollment. Yeah. So theirs was ranging from 0.52 down to 0.24. So there's actually decrease as the kids get older. But that's how you can compare those kind of expense ratios to save on costs if you want to manage yourself. I also want to show you how to use an investment calculator to calculate these expense ratios a little bit more in detail so you understand how to do it. So I'm going to pretend that I'm saving for my child who was just born. Don't mind the age. What I'm doing right here is essentially just trying to get 18 years of investment growth, which mirrors a kid growing from 0 to 18. So I'll say I start their account with $1,000. I contribute $300 a month. And then remember, you have to subtract your expense ratio from your total return. So if your portfolio is returning 8% a year, but you've got an expense ratio that's 0.5, you've got to deduct that 0.5 from your 8%. So 8 minus 0.5 is going to be 7.5. So put that in for your real return every year, and you're going to get what that's going to grow to over time, 140,000. You can play around here if you want to up the contributions. That's how it would grow over time. But that's how you would kind of play around with a retirement calculator or any type of investment calculator. Another cool little calculator you can use, I just essentially Googled college tuition calculator, and Schwab's was the first one that came up. So they've got a really cool breakdown of it where you can pick a child and it'll give you the current, pretty much what a public, whatever your local, for me, I'm in Virginia, like Virginia Tech, would be $23,000 a year currently. Let's say I plan to contribute $300 a month. Same thing. He's got $1,000 in his savings account right now. They also let you pick kind of what you can expect the return to be. So in this instance, I'll use close to 6%. And down here, you can actually kind of change. So a lot of parents don't want to contribute, essentially pay for all of their kids' college. They want to pay for like half and let the kid pay for half to let them get some skin in the game. So you can adjust this down here to pretty much say, hey, I want to contribute. I only want to pay for 50% of their account. So you click it here. And then on the right, it's going to give you what their total tuition is going to cost in 18 years, how much your contributions grow to. So you're under this scenario, it actually did cover the 50%. So I hit my goal, but let's say I only contributed, instead of 300 a month, 100 a month. Let's see, 49,000. It'll update you, and you'll see in this graph up here how much you're funding versus the shortfalls and things like that. but you'll essentially see on here where you're falling between your goals and if you need to adjust them, if you need to increase more money, if you need to do more lump sum investing, if you have to invest in more kind of aggressively, more stocks to bonds. But these are cool little calculators you can use to see where you're at in saving for your kids' future costs. Let's pump this back up. So that was my demo for tonight. I hope that was a pretty good introductory of 529s versus UTMAs. I'm going to keep adding to this based off of what the questions I get back from you all. But I'll go into a little bit detail before I do the questions on what exactly we did and why we did it for my kid. So originally we opened the 529 for my son because that was just kind of naturally the first route that I learned. That's what parents were saving for their kids. But then I kind of just when I started getting more in control of my money and I was becoming a better money manager for myself, I was starting to think, man, in 18 years, and once again, this is just me personally, so don't take this as something you have to do or have to think. But I was thinking to myself, in 18 years, I think college is going to look completely different. I think it's going to be, my opinion, I think it's going to go from a 4-year institution to a 2-year kind of setup. I think it's going to be much more affordable. I think community colleges will be kind of more into it. But also there's just the unknown. 18 years from now, I don't know. I can't for sure say what it's going to be in 18 years. So what I did and what me and my wife kind of came up with is we would rather have them have a investment account at 18 that they can use for whatever purposes. So we switched their money we closed the 529, liquidated it, opened a UTMA and put all the money in there. We did have to pay a little bit of taxes on that because if you withdraw, like I said, it's that 10% penalty thing, but it's only on earnings. So there wasn't that much of earnings in his account yet. So it wasn't really that big of a hit. But we like the idea of him being able to inherit essentially a brokerage account at 18 years old or 21 years old. And he can use it for college if he wants to. Great, cool. Or he can use it for buying his first house, doing rental properties, build a business. I almost hope he kind of keeps contributing to it at 18 to 21. I plan to teach him how to manage that account and keep growing it so he could grow it to $1 million by whatever, 28, 30. And then even if he does go to college, another thing he could do is take out loans, but don't pay for those loans with his UTMA, keep funding his UTMA. And as his UTMA grows over time, kind of like how people do with mortgages and not paying them off and investing and then paying it off with invested money, he could let his account grow to $1 million, $2 million by sometime in his 30s, and then just pay that loans off with all of the earnings from his UTMA. So that's why we went the UTMA route in the end with the 529. There's never an easy answer on which is the best option for you. You really just kind of got to sit down with your spouse or just yourself if you're managing the money and think, what are the goals for my kid? What do I want? What do I think it's going to, where do I think the future's going? And then make your selection from there. So with that being said, that concludes my presentation. I'll leave it open to the open floor now for questions, and I'll try to answer as many as I can.
Yeah, I got a question.
Yep.
I'm not a real big fan of the 529s, the UTMAs, or the UGMAs, mainly because of the fact that at some point, far prematurely, that I believe the child that becomes a young adult gets control over it. What's another option for passing down, basically, like what you said, a brokerage account? But again, I'm not a fan of the UTMA or the UGMA because they get that control at 18 and 25.
So for a 529, they don't get control. You control it. They don't. I think that might be a little bit, may have misheard that. You always control the 529. So you essentially are going to be the one paying out of that account, but you control it. So once they graduate, and let's say you've got 50 grand left over in a 529, they don't get that money. You can give it to them, but they don't automatically have control over it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I guess the second part I didn't explain well was the education expenses. I'm not a fan of using it for education expenses.
Mm-hmm.
So the 529 would be out as well. Is there a way I can just do a brokerage account under mines and pass it down some way?
Yes, this is a good question. And I'm going to caveat this at the beginning. I don't have this complete answer on. I'm still working with my CPA on the exact tax implications of this. You can open a brokerage account. Fundamentally, you can open a brokerage account and essentially give it to someone else. But there's going to be that. Remember, I was talking about that kind of gift tax, that $15,000 gift tax. It's essentially like gifting money still. So there still is a tax wall that you're going to run into doing that type of route. The benefit of it is, like you said, your worry. If your kid doesn't get their shit together until like they're 30 years old,
Right.
Still have that brokerage in your name. A negative, though, is you're going to be paying taxes at your rate at all times because it's in your name. You're not going to get that kind of child tax rate, but you do get complete control of it. But you're still going to run into that issue when you essentially transfer the assets to them, that gift tax. Message me, though. I'm still working with my CPA. I'll get you the final answer, and I'll give you like some scenarios. Like if you've got 200 grand and how would you transfer that over to like a kid at 30 years old? I'll give you the exact tax implications for that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Sean. I also have this is Brennan. I have a quick answer to that as well. So another route you could possibly take would be to open a Roth IRA and fund it up to the taxable income that the child files with the IRS. So a lot of parents do this route as well. So if their kid's making money, let's say shoveling snow or something like that, they can go ahead and fund it up to, let's say they make $3,000 a year, they can fund a Roth IRA up to $6,000. So if they make up to $6,000 or over, they can fully fund a Roth IRA, and that's another route you could take as well.
Thank you.
Hi, I just have a quick question. What was the thing you used to calculate your net worth that you showed in the beginning?
That application is called Personal Capital. You can download that on your phone, and there's a web application, but it's been one of my favorite apps. I've never run into a security issue with it either. I've got all of my bank accounts. Let me put it in the chat here as well for you.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. But yeah, that'll link all of every type of financial account you can imagine. It'll calculate your net worth for you. There's also some tools, some calculators that'll help you out as well. It's a great little kind of like one-stop shop for all your finances.
Hi, I have a question.
Mhm.
Can you still fund the 529 plan when the child is in college?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of parents do. So like
Okay.
the kids like in their sophomore year, you can still be funding it. Because once again, remember, you always control this account. So if you've got multiple kids, let's say you have 3 kids and the first one is 2 years in, and you're kind of just planning to use the same 529 for all of them, you can keep funding it. And then when they graduate, just essentially change the beneficiary to the next kid and just continuously keep funding it. There's no like limits on if they're in college, you have to stop.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I have a question.
Yep.
I wanted to know if you, for 529, right, you've been putting money into it and then the child doesn't want to go to college, would you would be charged penalty fees if you take it out to do something else, or it has to do?
So if you're a member, you control the account as the parent. If they don't go to college, you don't have to give them that money. You can, if you have another kid, you can change the beneficiary to them and essentially let them, if they're going to college, use it for them. You can transfer it to a niece or nephew. You can transfer it any type of way that you would want to within your family.
So it has to go to education.
The only time you're going to pay those taxes if you withdraw it and essentially give it to them. So, but once again, it's up to you. You don't have to give it to them is the thing, but you will pay taxes if you do take it out for non-education expenses. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I have another question.
Mhm.
For the Roth IRA, does it automatically turn over to the child when they turn 18?
Brennan, I'm going to let you kind of talked about this one a little bit. Do you want to hit this Roth IRA one? I believe it does transfer to them at 18. I could be wrong though.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But as Brennan said, though, for the Roth IRA, the child has to have reportable income. So they have to be working on their own and have some type of income coming in. Or if you have a business and you can justify them working for it, they can have the IRA. But if they don't have any types of income coming in that you can justify, you can't open what's called a custodial Roth IRA for them.
Do you know if that will impact their financial aid?
Oh, that's a good. I don't off the top of my head. Unless you do, Brendan, I can get back to you.
Okay.
The Roth IRA would be in their name. I don't think retirement accounts count against FAFSA, but DM me and I'll get you a final answer for that. Just find me in the Discord, the Wealth Dad, and I'll get you a final answer for that one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I'll answer a couple of these questions in the chat real quick. Were those Vanguard fees that I showed investor share class versus Admiral? They were a little bit more expensive. So they definitely weren't Admiral. I don't know why they charge a little bit more for their 529s. So I don't know if they're investor share or Admiral. They're definitely just a little bit more expensive for whatever reason. This recording will be in the Wealth Squad Discord. Last one is a 529, the smarter choice for a family making over 200,000. Up to you. Once again, this is very dependent. So if you have 2 kids, let me assume that you also live in Virginia so I can give you an answer. You can you can contribute $8,000 and write off $8,000 from your state taxes, lowering your taxable income. So if your goal is maximizing all of your tax benefits, it could be a good benefit for you. If you're making over 200 grand, you're making good income. A lot of times I'll see with high income families is they'll actually do a combination of both. They'll open a 529, kind of like for the family. So they'll just fund aggressively this 529 and change beneficiaries when they need to, and they'll get those tax benefits. But then they'll also open UTMAs for their children as well. I've seen that a couple of times. So if you kind of want to take this offline or ask a little bit more, I can guide you a little bit on maybe what I would do. But it's really dependent on each of your individual situations. Your income limit still, I can't give you a cookie cutter what exactly you should do, because I don't know, like I said, what your goals are and stuff.
I have a question.
Yep.
Hi, do you know if they track how many accounts you have open? Let's say if I wanted to open both, just in case, a 529 and a UTMA, is there like a situation where they give you penalties or something because you have more than one account open for the same child?
So are you asking, is it okay to have a 529 and a UTMA for one child?
Yes.
Yes, you can have that for one child. There's not going to be any issue with that. But like you'll run it if you try to open, like how some people try to do with like IRAs. If you open like a 529 with your state and like Vanguard and try to contribute like, let's say you contribute 10,000. I'm gonna use hypotheticals, 10,000 to each. You're gonna go over that 15,000. Like it's gonna report it all as one like 529 in terms of what you contributed. So the short answer is you can have a UTMA and a 529 for your individual. They're not going to penalize you for that.
But you still have to worry about your contributions to make sure it's not going over the amount per person, pretty much.
Yeah, so that gift tax is 15 grand. So if you're getting close to there, if you're working with a CPA, make sure you're kind of talking with them to see what that gift tax issue is going to be. But like I said, every individual in the country has a lifetime, I think it's like $11.5 million gift tax exclusion, which means essentially, from what I understand, is if you have $11.5 million to like hit before you really have to start worrying about these taxes. I could be wrong with what I was reading with that. But my short answer is if you get close to that 15 grand, get in contact with your CPA, go hit up like H&R Block if you don't have a CPA, just to kind of get there, or go to our tax chat in Discord. and post that question. I think we have a couple tax professionals in there who could help you out as well if you get close to that 15 grand.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. I shoot all of my stuff to my CPA. That was one of the best hires I did this year, was getting a CPA. Once I get close to any limits now, I run it with him.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So say if your kid, or say if you homeschool your kid or your children, and you like to travel with your family, can you use the 529 for like educational travel purposes in a sense or something like that?
So if you homeschool and you travel, can you use that as like an educational expense?
Yeah.
I don't have the like per se answer what you would, because once again, what qualifies as an educational expense, I'm sure you could fluff a little bit. I'm sure there's room. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking like if you could somehow justify it as like a what is it, like a study abroad travel program that's in line with their schooling, I'm sure you could probably make that count. Once again, working with the CPA, I wouldn't do that on your own. I wouldn't say go travel to Italy for 20 grand with your family and but like I said, if you're going to Italy and you're teaching, if there's like a history stuff that you're doing with them and that's towards their curriculum, I don't see why that wouldn't be an educational expense for them. But like I said, run it by the CPA. I'm sure you can get creative with what qualifies as an educational expense as homeschooling.
Appreciate you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Say a person is interested in opening a 529 account, but they don't have any business with Vanguard or Schwab. Can they still open an account specifically for the purpose of establishing a 529 account, or do you already have to have some sort of personal?
So if you're a brand new essentially customer to them, you don't have an IRA and brokerage, you're asking if you can open a 529 with them as the first account?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes, sir.
absolutely. You don't have to have an IRA or brokerage to go open an account with Vanguard. It would be the same concept. So if I was you, I would go to Google. I'll do it for you. Let's see. I would literally just Google open Vanguard 529 and just go literally to their first link and just go through the process. It'll give you the option open a Vanguard 529 account, and it's just like any type of bank account or investment account. You'll enter all of your information and you'll be good to go. They're not going to bug you about opening an IRA or anything.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I have a question. For the UTMA, when you're contributing, like you said, you can contribute different amounts, like from $100 to like 500. Do you just have to select a fund or is there like a specific cost for like investing it, like the price of an ETF versus just like, I guess, a regular fund? Is there does the fund have a cost, or will it just use that $100 contribution?
So almost all of these, unless you're buying stocks, which I don't even think you can do in a 529. I think you can do it in a UTMA. But if you're in a 529, you're mostly just going to have index funds or age-based options. And some of them, like Vanguard's the highest. I still believe their index funds in a 529 require you to have a $3,000 initial investment. Their age-based options might be different. Let me check real quick. But essentially, once you're invested in it, let's just use Schwab. Theirs is always lower. So they might have like a $100 initial investment. Once you're in the fund, it doesn't matter the share price. If you invest $100, $200, $300, that entire $100 to $300 is going to get invested regardless of the index fund share price. It'll buy you fractional shares. So if like the fund itself is like $200 a share and you're investing $300, it'll buy you a share and a half. It'll give you that half share, but it will invest all of your money. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you so much.
Yeah. It's like, Brennan, you're helping me out in the chat. Appreciate it. Also, if you have like any, like, I know Brennan's not a budget dog. He's a CPA. I don't think he runs taxes, but he can help out a lot with these kind of technical accounting questions, I believe, as well. If you want to post them to him, he could probably help you out. See if I missed any.
I got a question.
Uh-huh.
It's a little bit of on the personal side, but would you mind sharing your strategy for how you contribute to your son's UTMA?
Like the amount that we do, or like how we invest it?
Maybe not the amount, but like, do you do it every 2 weeks or every week, or
Oh, okay.
do you have it automatic?
Sure. So I'm actually kind of a caveman. Most people say you should automate your investments, which essentially means like you link it to your bank account, and every week or 2 weeks it'll automatically contribute. I like to manually do all of my investing. So for his account, I do it on the first trading day of the new month. So whether that's the first or the second of the month, regardless of what it is, whatever the first trading day of the new month is when I put the money in. We put $400 a month into his account, and we use that. Why we used 400, I believe, is because when I ran the calculations for his 529 initially, it said I needed about $220,000 in 18 years to fully fund his college. So essentially, when I flipped it to his UTMA, I still kept that same 400. So I know he's getting about $180,000 to $220,000, depending on what age he gets it. And as far as how we invested in those 2 index funds, I actually do a cool little trick that I'll show you that you can kind of do if you want to self-manage stuff. So, and I actually did it for my kind of own portfolio, how I do my funds. So you can actually, like I said, these age-based options, think of it as like free investment advice from Vanguard professionals. So if you were to like call Vanguard and like, hey, I want to charge extra for one of your investment professionals to manage my money, they're going to put you in a portfolio that's very similar to their target date funds. It's not going to be crazy different. So if you wanted to kind of manage your money based off of your age and things like that, I actually go into Vanguard's target date funds. So I'm a young guy. I used like Vanguard's 2060 fund. Let's see. And then I go to see exactly how they construct these portfolios for long-term, like aggressive growth. And I see the exact funds that they use for it. And then essentially I just mimic it on my end. So it's kind of a free way to get investment portfolio advice without paying the extra fees to have them manage it. So hopefully that long kind of answer helps you out kind of how we do it with his. But like I said, it's just the first of the month, $400. It's pretty routine.
Why the first of the month? Curious.
So we do our mortgage and my brokerage account, our brokerage account funding and his stuff automatically at the first of the month. So when you hear the term pay yourself first, that's how we apply paying ourselves first. So before we pay anything towards expenses, we invest our money at the beginning of the month so that we know going into the rest of the month, most of all of our basic investing needs were already hit, and we can then kind of maneuver how we see fit after that. But it keeps us honest instead of waiting like kind of like midway through the month or the end of the month and maybe some crazy expense happens and then I miss the payment for whatever reason. I don't ever miss it when I do it at the beginning of the month. It's the first thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's more of a mindset thing.
100%. It's a complete mindset thing. I always invest first. Everything else comes second. My wife might not want to hear that. I actually think she's on this call tonight too. I could be wrong. I think I had her join this.
Okay. Thanks, man.
Yeah. Let's see. Nice, Brian, with the shout out. All right. If there's no more questions, let me think. There was a cool kind of question I didn't have an answer for. Where was it? It was in here. What happens to the UTMA account if the child passes away? Who does it go to? That's a good question. I'm going to Google it real quick. I don't have the answer, but where does UTMA go if child dies? So I work in technology, just as a background. So for people, so a lot of times in tech, you'll hear like, what do we say? Google Fi, essentially just Google every question that you have and you'll at least get a good idea. So if the minor dies before maturity, UTMA money becomes part of the minor's estate. If the minor does not have a will, the parents would most likely inherit the estate. So it looks like there's a good chance that the parent would get the money if the child dies, but you should be able, this is just looks like an opinion article. Whoever asked that, Elena, DM me please, and I will go to my CPA and get you to the answer to that, because that's actually a really, really good question that I want to know the answer to, and I'll get you that answer if you really want to know. Well, cool. All right. With that, thank you, everybody. I'm happy you guys came out on Saturday, 7. I think we had close to 100 people tonight, which is awesome for a Saturday night. So good for you guys for wanting to take the time out to learn a little bit more about this. I know this is a cool subject, or this is an important subject for a lot of parents out there, and a lot of people who aren't parents yet wanting to get prepared for this. So good for you all. Please shoot me the DMs if you want to. This is recorded. Hopefully I did the recording right. We'll post this soon. And everybody have a good Saturday night. Thank you.